This is Chapter 1, Part 2 of Roald Dahl's George's Marvellous Medicine. Get comfortable and ready to continue the story. Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her.
"Never grow up," she said. "Always down.
Yes, Grandma.
And stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead."
Cabbage? Oh no, I don't like cabbage, George said.
"It's not what you like or what you don't like,"
Grandma snapped.
"It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage. And it's got caterpillars in it. So much the better."
Ugh, said George.
"Caterpillars give you brains,"
said the old woman. Mummy washes them down the sink, George said.
"Mummy's as stupid as you are,"
Grandma said.
"Cabbage doesn't taste of anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs, too."
Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs.
"Whenever I see a live slug on a piece of lettuce,"
Grandma said,
"I gobble it up, quick, before it crawls away. Delicious."
She squeezed her lips together, tight, so that her mouth became a tiny, wrinkled hole.
"Delicious," she said again. "Worms and slugs and beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you."
You were joking, Grandma.
"I never joke," she said. "Beetles are perhaps best of all. They go a crunch."
Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth.
"Sometimes, if you're lucky," she said, "you get a beetle inside the stem of a stick of celery. That's what I like."
Grandma, how could you?
"You find all sorts of nice things in sticks of raw celery,"
the old woman went on.
"Sometimes it's earwigs."
I don't want to hear about it, cried George.
"A big, fat earwig is very tasty,"
Grandma said, licking her lips.
"But you've got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its back end, and if it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwig first, chop chop, before it bites you."
George started edging towards the door. He wanted to get as far away from her as possible, from this filthy, old woman.
"You're trying to get away from me, aren't you?"
she said, pointing a finger straight at George's face.
"You're trying to get away from Grandma."
Little George stood by the door, staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back at him. Could it be, George wondered, that she was a witch? He had always thought witches were only in fairy tales, but now he was not so sure.
"Come closer to me, little boy,"
she said, beckoning him with a horny finger.
"Come closer to me and I will tell you secrets."
George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either.
"I know a great many secrets,"
she said, and suddenly she smiled. It was a thin, icy smile, the kind a snake might make just before it bites you.
Come over here to Grandma, and I'll whisper secrets to you.
George took a step backwards, edging closer to the door.
You mustn't be frightened of your old Grandma,
she said, smiling that icy smile. George took another step backwards.
Some of us,
she said. And all at once, she was leaning forward in her chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard before.
Some of us,
she said,
have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shapes.
A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened.
Some of us,
the old woman went on,
have fire in our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets.
George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor.
We know how to make your nails drop off and your teeth grow out of your fingers instead.
George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him most of all. The frosty smile, the brilliant, unblinking eyes.
We know how to have you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you.
Grandma, he shouted. Stop!
We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other.
George made a dive for the door.
It doesn't matter how far you run,
he heard her saying.
You won't ever get away.
George ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. And there we have the end of chapter 1. Please stay tuned for chapter 2. It'll be posted tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed your story. Good night.